Welcome to the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you take control of your life. Together, we'll explore practical tips, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. Making small changes is possible and can lead to big results. Are you ready? Let's go do this. Adam, what a thrill it is to have you here on my podcast. I am so excited for where our conversation is going to go because I think it's going to be fun and epic.
It is my honor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. I like to let all my guests start with a story, whatever story they want to craft, true or not. Doesn't matter.
There once was a mouse who lived in a castle.
It just depends on, what you want to put out there about yourself, but we'll go there first.
Yeah. Well, I think that the one of the best stories, like I guess I could share about myself. The one that comes to mind immediately is when I was 9 years old. I heard there was a day, like a weekend, when I heard that professional quarterback Roger Staubach was going to be at our local high school. Now I'm dating myself.
I was just ready to say.
Roger Staubach was a professional quarterback in the NFL in the 1970s, who played for the Dallas Cowboys, and this was probably 1984, 85 or something like that. But I heard that this professional quarterback was going to be at the local high school, filming a commercial. And I happened to be playing at that time for the Mission Viejo Cowboys, which is, a Pop Warner football team. And when I say playing for the Mission Viejo Cowboys, remember, like, we're going to get into this, but I lived in absolute fear and terror for most of my young life. So playing football was not a very long-lived experience. It maybe lasted 2 weeks, but within that 2 weeks time span, I heard that Roger Staubach was going to be at the high school. So I went to the high school on that weekend to go see him. I dressed up all to the nines in my Cowboys attire. I brought a football just to get a glimpse of this quarterback, of this, professional football player. And, when I got there, there was a bunch of people around, a bunch of adults, and they were kind of like, hustling around trying to get this commercial filmed. And Roger Staubach caught like an eye shot of me and saw what I was wearing and just kind of like, did one of those looks where, he kind of squinted at me and everything, but he held up his hands like this, like the international symbol for throw me the football. And so sure enough, as a young boy would, seeing a professional quarterback ask him to throw him the football, I threw him the football, and he proceeded to play catch with me for every outtake for the next hour and a half or so. He asked me questions about my life. He wanted to get to know me, and I was just so inspired at that moment. And many years later, I still have a picture of him and me in that instance. Which, by the way, he had a friend there who took that picture for us, and these were the days before digital cameras. So it wasn't my camera. He took a picture with his own camera. He found the school I went to and hand delivered the picture to my school office so that I could have it. And that taught me a very valuable lesson in leadership and just being just being an adult in the world who has influence. When you feel like you can inspire somebody, when you have that capability, when you are blessed with that opportunity, that is the moment when you should absolutely lean into it and let everybody else know that you're there for them to help them succeed. So that was just a huge, huge lesson I learned from somebody who didn't have to give me the time of day, but just went out of his way. It was quite amazing. So that was the story that came to mind.
That's a great story.
Thank you.
How'd that make you feel when he did that back in, like, the football back and forth, and then wanted to get to know you as a person?
Oh man, it was. I felt like he made me feel at the top of the world at that point, because at that time in my life, as I kind of mentioned in the story, I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. I've never really felt very good about myself. And I was always erred on the side of caution, like very much so, to the extent that I wouldn't take any risks. But the encouragement that he gave me, and, talking about like, wow, you're a great, you throw the ball really well, and he even wrote on my football, star of the future. I immediately went to my coaches, like at that team, and said, Roger Staubach says that I need to be the quarterback of this football team. And so the confidence pendulum just swung all the way the other side at that moment.
Did they make you quarterback? I'm
No, they did
guessing
not.
no.
And wisely, they did not.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's amazing how one small act that somebody does
Mhm.
can have such a profound effect on the person receiving, and that we just
Yes.
don't always give ourselves enough credit for that, or nor do we stop
Mhm.
sometimes in those moments to like acknowledge somebody for something big or small. It doesn't even have to be big, it can be small.
Yeah.
In that case, he made your day, just by throwing a football back and forth and showing a mild amount of interest in who you were as a person. I think that's incredible
Yeah.
in your story. So cool. So
Yeah.
cool. What else from your story there? Because I know you have a few more things in there. You have a podcast.
I do. Yeah. So I do host a podcast called Flow Over Fear, and the whole premise there is that we actually can rise above our fears, as powerful as they feel in our lives. We can rise above our fears, and we do so when we actually live into the flow that we have. And that comes with a variety of elements. There's a lot of things that go into that, but that basically extended from my experiences growing up with just extreme fear and anxiety. And the reason that I really developed an anxiety disorder in my own life was because I just tended to live into the fear that I experienced. And talking about that aforementioned football, Pop Warner experience, the reason I quit the sport was because I got hit one too many times and I didn't like being hit and it was uncomfortable. And so I just decided not to play football anymore. And I walked away from situations like that. And that happened with many different sports. It happened with people. I didn't approach people that I liked or girls that I liked because I was afraid of rejection. And those experiences, while they didn't seem like really earth-shatteringly like life-threatening or anything like that, because I walked away. So I didn't play Pop Warner football. So what? So I didn't talk to the girls I like. Big deal. But as I stacked those experiences over the course of many years, I began to reinforce a series of limiting beliefs in my life that began to just shape my entire experience and actually inflated or made the fear that I experienced bigger. In attempting to suppress and retreat from that fear and push it down and fight against it, I actually made that fear bigger in my life.
Yeah.
And when I did that, my world got smaller to the point where I kind of descended over time as I stacked those experiences. I developed, really, really high anxiety, started getting severe panic attacks in college, and leaned into alcohol as my solution. And, spoiler alert, I became a pretty rabid alcoholic for the next 10 years. And that became my life, was just a vicious cycle of debilitating panic and shame while trying to make it through sober most days, and drinking myself into blackouts by night on the weekends, and into numbness.
Mm. Yeah, that fear. What's interesting about fear, and we'll go to also into like like your sobriety story as well, because
Mhm.
that'll tie back in. But the funny thing about fear, isn't it? It's like the more you try and in your story, the more you try and suppress it, the bigger it becomes.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really does. It's one of those things I didn't learn till way later, into my 30s, the 3 decades of my life of just fighting fear. But when I was in my 30s, when I did get sober, that's when I really learned that it's in standing up and surrendering to that fear and healing with it, and actually staring in the face and getting curious about it, that you start to take the power away from it. And when
Yeah.
you start to take the power away from it, it doesn't go away. You still feel the feelings, but the feelings are just that. They're just feelings. And when you can kind of lean into that fear as a signal, I mean, think about it this way. If you're feeling afraid, chances are there's something bigger than yourself that you're going after, right? Or it's either that or there's danger. And when it's danger, there's a big bear cub in front of you or a big bear in front of you. You don't want to go towards the bear. That's danger.
Yeah.
But if it's not danger, then what is it? Well, it's telling you that you're pushing up against the edge of your comfort zone. And that's where life begins. So we
That
have to lean into those experiences.
Yeah, we just don't get it, that fear. And you're right, you just mentioned it. We're not talking about the fear where, you're getting chased by a rabid dog, or, there's a
Right.
bear in front of you. It's not that kind of fear, but those everyday kind of fears where it's like, okay, I got to put myself out there, or the ego's yelling at you like, hey, don't do that, or, you're afraid to ask the boss for the raise, or the things like that. Those type of
Yeah.
fears. That's the stuff that can become way paralyzing that you were talking about. Once you got sober, sober, how did you learn to cope then with fear and anxieties and social inhibitions? Because you had used alcohol all those years to deal with those things. Now you're sober and you no longer have that crutch. What kind of
Mhm.
tools were in your toolbox?
Yeah, fortunately, I think that I fell into the very first tool that you could find as far as overcoming fear is concerned, and that is community. Community is, I cannot stress it enough, a trusted community that has elements of mentorship, cohort, and trust is the most powerful tool we have with regard to emotional healing or personal development. If you could find those communities, I mean, we're both part of these kinds of communities and
Yeah.
masterminds and things that help lift us up. We're trying to create these communities, but that was really the first element I had. And in those first 3 decades of my life, when I was living in my fear, that was one of my fears, was just being involved with other people or being in communities. I tended to shy away from that kind of stuff because I was afraid of being, embarrassed or feeling rejected or all of those things. So having been in that situation of desperately needing and wanting to get sober, that was the first opportunity for me to actually face my fear, was to immerse myself in one of these communities. So to answer your question, I think that there's a couple of things there. There's community, but there's also exposure. I exposed myself to the fear of leaning into that community. So at some point, we just have to take a leap into that community. It doesn't have to be a massive leap. It could just be like one of those small steps to get that big win, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
We love those small steps.
Yeah.
But, like, did you find though, when you leaned into the fear, since you struggled with fear for almost 3 decades, did you find that when you leaned into, what did you find when you leaned into your fear? How long did the fear stick around? Did it dissipate? And what were the surprising things that you found when you decided to face your fears that you didn't
Yeah.
expect?
Yeah. I think some of the surprising things that I found over time was that the fear certainly doesn't go away. Like when people talk about overcoming fear, there's a lot of weird mixed messages that we hear around that. Some people just say like, well, just like if you're a David Goggins type, it's like, well, F the fear, just do it, or there's the idea that you can overcome it and that somehow it goes away, but it doesn't go away. And it's hard to describe how that feeling is, but when I got into sobriety, though, I mean, the community helped. The fact that I was surrounded by other people that were working toward the same thing, that I wasn't alone, was so powerful. It helped lift that fear away. And then the exercise of actually like naming the fears, where there's a fourth step that you do. There's 12 steps in sobriety, right? In Alcoholics Anonymous. The fourth step is you take a personal inventory of your life. And part of that is really cataloging the fears that you have. And when I cataloged my fears, that was a big exercise too, because I started to name all of the fears that I had. And then I shared them with another person. And that took that power away from them. When I was talking about that when you're giving more power to the fear by suppressing it, when you actually name it and you put it out there in the world and you share it with people that like, I'm afraid of confrontation. I'm afraid of rejection. I feel like I'm afraid of being found out as a fraud. I feel like an imposter. Saying those things actually takes some of the power away from it.
I
And then
was
you can
going to
get to the work. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say. So it's actually just putting them on paper and
Mhm.
neutralizing them and then saying them out loud as well.
Yeah.
Do you use anything like changing your words, instead of saying something like, like, okay, I'm afraid to go into a social situation, or I'm afraid to do X, Y, and Z. Did you find yourself reframing what it is, those fears that you put down on paper, and turn them around?
Yes, but it took a little longer to get it to do that. I once I had about a year of sobriety, and I actually started pursuing more of my dreams at that point, the things that I'd been putting off because of fear. Once I started doing that, I started learning it, getting into like the personal development kind of mindset, the Tony Robbins, the other mindset shifts that you could take, and started learning about how changing your language around some of these negative things actually benefits you. I've always looked at that idea of healing or building your relationship with fear as kind of two major steps with a bunch of small steps in the middle. And the two big big parts of that are the healing journey and then the personal development journey. The healing journey happened through my sobriety. I had to heal a lot of wounds. Like I had gaping wounds, like emotional healing that I needed to go through. And that required things like community and willingness and doing that initial work of really just kind of coming to terms and facing that fear. And then once I got through that phase and I got to the personal development phase, now it was time to actually shift that relationship further with the fear and actually start to embrace it, to build a relationship with it. And that's where we start to change the wording around it. When you hear that subtle shift there of instead of facing fear, embrace the fear.
Embrace it. Yeah.
Right?
I'm part of a training program for coaches, and it's heroic. That's just the name of the program that it is. And we talk about fear, and exactly what you just said is one of the way the Stoics faced their fears. So the program I'm part of, it takes ancient Stoicism and then it combines it with modern science. Right. So one of the things that the ancient Stoics would say is like, you don't run from your fear. You face your fear, you embrace your fear, you don't try and suppress it, but instead you come alongside of it. And as we were talking about, on the other side is generally something that's, that's something you're called to do. And it's generally a better thing on the other side when you're facing your fear and you're going, you're just heading yourself into it. It's kind of like the buffalo in the storm. Have you heard that story?
Oh yeah.
With the buffaloes coming, the storm comes out. They run into the storm where the cows run away from the storm. And when you run away from it, it just lasts a lot longer rather than just going right into it. It's one of my favorite analogies about fear, and it only lasts for just a second. Did you also know, have you ever heard, or did you know, and I've learned this recently, that the body's physiological response to fear is the same as excitement?
Yes.
Yeah. When I heard that, it was like, oh my God, that was just like a game changer for me, because now instead of being afraid to do something, I now say, I'm excited to do this. I'm afraid, but I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, right. It's so true too. I mean, that those sensations of fear and excitement are very, very similar. And I mean, I think there's a big distinction in there of that fear and excitement too, and that's the risk. And the risk tells you that, like, anything that's worth it, that's worth pursuing, that's going to help you grow, has to have some level of resistance. And that there's this feeling like if something's worth pursuing, you're going to have excitement and you're going to have fear. So I think that there's a very divine reason why those two things exist hand in hand, that excitement and fear. It's basically your heart saying eureka and your brain saying nope. And that combination of things should be, the signal that you're onto something great. Like if it really excites you and it really scares you.
Did you feel that way when you started your podcast, like that sense of fear, but yet excitement at the same time?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's three ways in which I think that fear generally shows up for us. I mean, we can call it thousands of different fears like that we have, but I think generally speaking, we can categorize those non-danger fears into three core categories, and they're uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And so for me, all of those came into play when I started my podcast. It's like uncertainty. Nobody's going to listen. Who's going to listen to this? There's nobody that's going to listen to this. This isn't going to go anywhere. How's that going to happen? Or that overwhelm. How am I going to find the time to do this? And like, actually, what if I don't have the time later on? And it's just too much and I can't keep going with it. And then the self-doubt, who am I to be doing this and delivering this message? I'm not worthwhile. But it was also something. So that language was in my mind. But the other part of it was this excitement. That's like, this is going to be a lot of fun. This fills me up. I feel really good about it. And so, yeah, again, that was that signal to me that, yeah, if I want to grow, this is probably something I need to do to pursue it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like you just keep going. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I enjoy doing this now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I enjoyed doing it before, but it's like, oh, okay. Now, isn't it funny? You have 160 or 54 episodes. I can't remember. You're up in the 150s. I just passed my 100 mark. Isn't it funny? Yeah, thank you. Isn't it funny? Like now, are you at the point? I mean, are you at the point like you can't imagine life without a podcast?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, is it takes up. I mean, because it's so much of my life right now that yeah, it is absolutely that, and the fear doesn't go away. Like I'll have guests on, and I want to make sure that I serve that guest, and that those fears just keep coming in. Like, what if I don't do this? What if I don't serve them? What if I say the wrong thing? What if this? And and of course that never happens, but it all serves as this evidence for me later on, these
Right.
points of reference that yeah, I could succeed through that struggle.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I can't really perceive a time where I wouldn't be wanting to do a podcast.
Yeah, isn't it funny once you
Yeah.
start, it's like, oh, I'm not going to stop now. And I want to pick up on something you just mentioned, and it's about that evidence
Mhm.
of having a success. And
Mhm.
how important that really is for us to look back and find those evidences of success in order to help us at times when things get really challenging. I know you have built companies and you're in charge of quite a few. You didn't go into that in your background.
Mhm.
What are times in your life where you like had to look back to encourage you to continue going forward?
Yeah. So I've had to do that numbers of times in my life. And I think the context there is that, when I talked about the heart and the brain screaming at you, one is screaming Eureka while the other one's saying no. The heart is the one that wants to follow the passion. And a lot of times in our life, most of the time in our life, if we're not paying attention to it, our brain will scream louder than our heart. And that's when our brain will tell us all of that language around the uncertainty, the overwhelm, and the self-doubt that we're not enough, that we can't do it, we won't have the time, we won't do this. So our brain is protecting us. That's the primal brain of like, throughout evolutionary times. It's telling us that. But in order to tap into that heart piece, that's where I think we have to find those points of reference in our lives. And it's not always easy because our brain is loud. And a lot of times we just can't think of those times when we have had those successes. So those times in my past was when I did get sober. It's like I felt absolutely hopeless when I was sitting in a jail cell after a DUI, where I thought that I had lost complete control over my life. I was now a danger to myself and others, and I didn't know how I could live on this earth. I was hopeless, and I had to latch on to some level of hope that something could get me there. And that at that point, it wasn't really anything necessarily within me, but it was the fact that there was a community of support that I could at least lean into as the last step on the block. But over time, as I leaned into that community, that developed a point of reference for me that I could succeed in something. When I had a year of sobriety, that was something I'd never had before, that I never thought that I could get, was a year of sobriety. And I went through that, and I achieved that. And so when I wanted to pursue something next, when I wanted to pursue the Ironman triathlon, I told myself, look, I did this thing that I thought was impossible. Why couldn't I apply that to something else? And that became a point of reference for me. And then I stepped into that. And when I achieved the Ironman journey, that became a point of reference for me. So you can start stacking these points of reference that any one of us can achieve. And they don't have to be the Ironman triathlon. They could be helping out a customer at work, or in some way, or it could be just giving some of your time, or kind of finding a creative solution, whatever that may be to you. It could be a point of reference for your ability to succeed and pursue greater successes going forward.
Excuse me. I love that you said that it doesn't have to be a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
because I think too often in life, we make ourselves to feel nominal because we haven't run an Ironman or done a triathlon. I haven't done that. I'm
Right.
a runner, but I've never done that. So I don't have that as a point of reference. And we tend to discount those little things. So I'm so glad you said that,
Mm-hmm.
because I hope somebody listening is encouraged that a small step, just like any small step, can be a big win in somebody else's life. Sometimes we just don't know it.
Yeah.
We don't know it. So I really enjoyed listening to your podcast. I was listening the other day, and your one episode was on small steps and big
Yeah,
wins. And I
yeah.
was listening to that, and I'm like, Oh, that sounds really familiar. So I was even more super excited for our conversation today as well. Out of that podcast, as I was listening, you talked about your mission is to
Mhm.
spread positivity on social media through puns. Talk a little bit about that, how that came about, and I know there's a cool thing. There's a couple cool things that came out of that. So I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think great minds think alike with regard to small steps leading to big wins. That was certainly something that helped me through to start to compile those successes that I'd had in the past. It's just small little steps. And one of those things that like really made a dramatic, change in my life was starting to share a pun on social media every day. And it sounds silly, and it is, but
Oh, they're
there's
great. I've been
yeah,
following them. They're
thank
so
you.
fun.
Yeah,
I
there
love it.
and there's a method to the madness on that because in 2015, and I remember it, distinctly. It was, I had been 3 years sober. I'd already started participating in Ironman and stuff like that. But there was another addiction that I had throughout my life that I thought was very important, and it was very important that I watch and follow the news because I needed to be informed. We needed to be informed
Don't
about
we
what's going
all?
on. Yeah. And if we're not informed, we're not intelligent. We don't, make good decisions, and we don't vote for the right person or whatever. But, I found myself getting really like immersed in it, addicted to it, and and I was angry on social media. I was giving into all of like the comments threads that people were posting on all of this garbage. I noticed it was affecting my mindset. But in 2015, it was the midst of like really contentious like pre-election stuff and all that kind of stuff, and I had just had enough of it. And I decided I didn't want to take myself off of social media because everyone does that and then they come back eventually. But I wanted to commit to a few things. I wanted to commit to not watching the news for 30 days and not participating in the news. And then I also wanted to, in lieu of that, not participate in social media and very rigorously unfollow all of the people that were posting negative, like political stuff on all sides of the spectrum and negativity, and simply just post a pun a day for 30 days. And 8 years later, I'm still posting a pun a day on Facebook. So I'm well over 3,000 puns every day. And I have not watched the news actively, at least. I mean, it may be on in the background at the gym I'm at or something like that, but
Yeah, yeah.
I've never deliberately turned on the news or bought a newspaper or looked up like MSNBC or CNN or Fox News or anything like that on the internet. And yeah, I could tell you just that experience. Here's the life-changing uh, thing of that little baby thing, that small thing that I've done, was just posting a pun every day or a joke every day. It built a muscle of creativity. Over time, I became known as somebody that is delivering puns and humor to people in their lives. And it just became a muscle that I built so that I could like bring those up on the fly, which is great. That's, a great muscle to build. But it also contributed to my positivity every day and other people's positivity, to the point where that would be the first thing I do every day. So it was starting my day off with something positive and creative. And then on top of that, people were responding with their own puns to my puns. So it created these long strings of pun wars. And throughout the course of my day, I could look at them and see what other people were posting in response to my pun. And it brought light to the rest of my day. It was like just investing in my positivity. And so it's been just a small little thing. And it wasn't even that big a deal. The first thing that I posted was not even my pun. I didn't even have to come up with it. I just found a stupid joke and posted it. And that's all we had to do, because then people respond, but it's just bringing light to somebody's day.
Wow.
And that's how it started. That's where we're at.
Yeah, that was some small steps. Now, can you come up with them on your own now?
I do. Yeah. So I do frequently come up with them on my own, and I try to I try to create strings of puns so that, like, if I'm with my wife or with my family, now I do video puns where I'll just bring up a topic. Like we'll be out in nature and we'll be on a hike or something like that. And I'll be like, well, I feel like royalty because I brought my hiking boots, things like stupid things like that. And then we'll
Yeah,
keep
but
going
see,
down
I
the line.
laughed. That's awesome. I think that's great. And you know what? That small step that you consistently have done over these last years. If I remember correctly, you also wrote a book with somebody out
I
of
did.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there was some,
Interestingly enough. Yeah. He was one of the people that participated in my pun wars. And I found out that this guy, his name is Ryan Chapman. He was actually on the side posting his own puns every day for similar purposes. And so we kind of got connected through that. And we started, messing with each other on it. And we decided we'd write a book. And I don't know this for certain, but I am pretty sure, and nobody's challenged it, that our book, which is just a continuous string of puns, is the longest continuous string of puns in literary history,
oh, there you go.
unverified.
Yeah. Sounds like a Guinness Book of World Record thing to me, if that's
Right.
still a thing. I don't even know. Like that was around in our day, like 20 years ago. That was a big deal or was it Ripley's Believe It or Not? It was either
Yeah.
one or the other. Guinness Book of World Records, Ripley's Believe It or Not. I think they kind of went hand in hand. I don't know if they still really do that or if anybody even cares anymore.
I don't know. I think they do, because I've heard a few people that have bragged about it. And I think we actually looked into it, like trying to get that, but there was such a rigorous process, and I don't think that there was really any way to prove it, unless we read every book or something like that. I don't know how to prove something like that. But anyway,
Yeah, it's just an interesting fact that you can say it's unofficial,
right?
the unofficial longest book ever of puns in one place, I guess.
Yep.
So let's go on back a minute to fears and conquering fears, and in there has to be limiting beliefs
Mhm.
along
Yes.
with that. Talk about your process and how you walked through identifying your limiting beliefs and then what you do to overcome those in the face of fear.
Yeah, it's I I feel like limiting beliefs and fear in my work, because I talk about them a bit interchangeably. I think there's a lot of overlap there between the two. Meaning, I think that when in my experience, like suppressing my fears or retreating from fear or fighting against fear, what that did was it reinforced these limiting beliefs. And those limiting beliefs, in my opinion, are just really beliefs that we have about ourselves or the world around us that serve as obstacles in the way of what our true potential really is. And so A, we're afraid of something. B, we have an experience or we create a behavior or habit around that experience, and then a limiting belief is formed. So breaking that limiting belief, I believe, is part of kind of working backwards on that framework. So first is you take the limiting belief itself, you have to name it. Remember, we take the power away from fear. You want to name the fear. You want to say exactly what it is. Well, a lot of times we have these limiting beliefs, in our minds, but if they're in our minds, they're really unclear what they are. Like, we might be afraid of being rejected, but what's the root of that limiting belief? Is that a limiting belief that we don't feel like we are enough for that person, or we're enough to achieve that, or whatever? Then we have to name exactly what that limiting belief is. I don't feel like I am worth being this. That's not a shaming exercise, by the way. It's not a judgment exercise. It's just finding a truth exercise, or finding your truth exercise, so that we can break it. And then you work backward from there. And then you find, so since you've had some behaviors that reinforce those limiting beliefs, now we have to change those behaviors. We have to implement new behaviors that change, like you said, the language around it and the habits around it. So for me, take my Ironman journey, for instance. I was by no means a triathlete. I was never an athlete. I never swam the distance of a pool before, let alone like swam 2.4 miles. So changing my limiting belief around that I couldn't be an Ironman, I had to change my habits. But as your show is very appropriately titled, small steps to get there. I didn't just start by trying to swim 2.4 miles. I had to learn to float in a pool before I did anything else. So it's really starting and meeting yourself where you're at to change that limiting belief and build the behaviors around where you're at, but are pushing you just a small step in the direction of where you want to go to bridge that gap. And what I usually advocate in that instance is no more than 5% beyond your comfort zone, or taking that next step that'll take you just 5% toward where you want to be. And over time, those limiting beliefs become unwavering beliefs. And unwavering beliefs build conviction. And conviction is the path through uncertainty. and self-doubt.
Hmm. I love that you tied in the fact that, like, there are small steps that you've got these
Mhm.
limiting beliefs, but yet you start really small. You couldn't, you didn't, you had no idea how you're going to swim 2.4
Yeah.
miles. You had to learn to float in a pool first, but you
Yeah.
did it. You took the small steps each day. You said 5% to get 5% a little bit out of your comfort zone. What does that 5% look like tangibly? Because
Mhm.
you can say, like, well, we're going to give ourselves 100%, we're all in, or we're only half in. But in terms of growing, what would 5% look like to you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the important part about that is it's not a surgical precise 5%, right? It's more of a guideline. And what I would say that that looks like is you want to work backward from that big goal, and ultimately just kind of to the point where you meet yourself where you're at, and say conceivably, what is that next step that I can see in my line of sight that I could envision achieving. And then I could set a SMART goal around that. The SMART goal is
Yeah, smart. Good.
specific, measurable, uh, uh, achievable, relevant, and time bound, right? So having those elements around that goal, so that brings you just 5%. And you want to find it so that next goal doesn't overwhelm you with fear. Like, it doesn't overwhelm you with it. You're still feeling like you're outside of your comfort zone. But the point is that you just nudge your comfort zone instead of doing a massive swan dive beyond it. That keeps you that gives you the ability to achieve those small wins like you're talking about, and then stack those wins on top of the other. And over time, just like I did, like a year after starting, like learning to float in a pool, I stacked those 5% wins, learning to swim 25 yards in the pool, then 50 yards, and so on and so forth. So that by the following year, the next 5% that was staring at me was the starting line of my first Ironman, where I had to swim 2.4 miles in the open
Mhm.
ocean where you can't see the bottom and tsunamis come from. It's those are the kind of the steps that you have to take. So really making that next step just conceivable is how you want to look at that.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you so in setting that 5% better, how do you frame it when you set that next goal, but for
Mhm.
some reason you didn't quite make it, and you got that challenge in front of you, and you say that, you bring up the F word, I
Yeah,
failed. You
yeah.
know, there's a lot of talk lately around the word failure. And I'm just wondering, what's your take on it, your perspective when you don't hit that mark and you get back up and do it again?
Well, then you failed and you got to quit, and that's it. You got to stop completely. It's no, I kid. I do think that that failure. I agree with the common theme that's kind of going out there, and I'm glad that this is the theme around failure. Is that we're talking more about it as a learning experience, and the failure is not final, and that we should not shame ourselves from failure, but we have to look at our pursuing our dreams or our goals or big goals, and taking those small steps to get to that big goal as a scientific experiment. And if we look at it that way, science and scientific experiments are riddled with small failures, right? They're riddled with data points that tell you that this isn't the direction you should go, this maybe you should adapt, and maybe you should do this. And so the point is that as you're doing that, as you're taking those steps, you're you're moving back, and you're going back to meeting yourself with where you're at. And if your aim was off in this direction, in this 5%, then you take it back and you aim at another 5%, you take it back. And the key there is that you enjoy that process of learning, so that you can really get to that point. Any high achiever that is out there is going to tell you that how they got to where they're at is through a series of scientific experiments that involved lots of failure and lots of adaptation and changing and moving around. And you'll find that those little failures that you thought were failures were actually just steps on the process to get you to where you're at today.
Hmm.
Now, the aforementioned swimming thing, I had tons of little failures, tons of little like where I didn't, where I got in the open water too quickly and I got a panic attack and I had to get out, and I didn't quit. So I stepped back and I thought, like, how can I adapt? How can I change this 5% so that I can make another goal that brings me in that direction. You just keep moving forward.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what were some any micro failures that you had, but
Yeah.
you learn and you took them for learning experiences. I'm so thankful that actually this narrative is going on out there
Mhm.
about failure. It's really not failure. It's just something that you either win or you learn. It's
Right.
not a failure, and winners are, and learners are winners. And you just kind of, if you keep repeating that mantra to yourself, then failure isn't so bad. I mean, I can relate. I didn't do a whole lot of things in my own life because of fear of failure.
Mhm.
And you don't realize how paralyzing it is. And if you allow it to, it's going to rob your life.
Yeah.
And I like that you brought up before the brain and the heart. Like the brain can be really loud, but that heart, when we quiet ourselves down to listen to what our heart is telling us that we should do, then, those fears, they're still there, but they don't have as much hold on us as they think they do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about quiet and getting into silence and meditation. What are some things that you do that help you listen to that voice, help you listen to that heart so that you know what direction you should go in and not listen to those fears?
Yeah, I'll tell you that it's honestly something I struggle with a lot in terms of quieting my mind. As my mind is naturally active, like, just part of how I grew up is it just talks. I get it. I have some of those, obsessive compulsive tendencies of just, those thoughts that just anchor into me, right? So it's not something where I can very easily just, quiet my mind and meditate a lot of times. But the one thing that does work for me to really get into that quiet zone and get that confidence and that into that heart center point is to get out in nature or just get outside and breathe, take breaths. Take breaths, and I like to use the Wim Hof method of breathing because it gives me a framework around it. That's also one way to kind of work around finding those 5% and moving beyond your fear is to find a framework around it. Something like it's like scaffolding, like a structure that you can use to build on it. And the fact that Wim Hof has a framework for breathing just gives me something to attach to that I can focus on and breathe. And as I do that, it does center, it gets me in the moment and it gets me more present and it gets me into that heart mode. One of the, our brains live in the past and live in the future. Our hearts live in the present, but also pine for some dream that we have and think that we're bigger than ourselves. So that's where we want to try and find ourselves, is in the present, where we can meet our heart and then try to move ourselves forward with that.
So do you mind sharing what are some big dreams that are in your heart that are out there?
Yeah. So right now, what I'm dreaming of is when I think of dreams should scare me. And the thing that scares me the most and excites me the most is getting out on the stage and becoming a public speaker and sharing this message more broadly. And so I want to speak on stages. I built a keynote to speak on more stages, and I've actually in the process of developing a TED talk that I'm hoping to deliver by the end of this year, that is on the power of dad jokes and their ability to save the world.
Oh,
So
congrats.
that's kind of something that scares me right now, and something that that my heart is really pulling at.
Well, I saw you on stage in Chicago, and I wouldn't say that I could tell you were scared if you were. It was nice to meet you at that mastermind, by the way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But
That was a
yeah,
blast.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, to your point, like it's funny how those dreams start manifesting themselves when we actually listen to the heart, and then
Mhm.
we start leaning into the possibilities and the things that can be. Do you do vision setting? What are your thoughts on vision setting, writing this stuff down, and how have you seen it manifest in your life besides just speaking on stage like you did in oh gosh,
Chicago. Yeah.
Chicago? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think vision setting is incredibly powerful. And it's I think it's the first step toward actually goal setting. So I like to think of vision as like a funnel, and I like to think it in terms of vision and reflection. And so if you picture an hourglass in your mind, at the very top of that hourglass, you have sand coming in, and the sand that's coming in is basically that big vision that you have, right? And it's like, and I think of that vision as something that should be on your mind, the long-term 10-year, 5-year kind of target of like, what do I want to achieve by that? I want to be speaking, say, 30 times a year on however many stages and doing whatever. Say that's the goal. And then that filters down as it narrows down into the next year's goals. Like, what do you want to achieve this year to get to that? And then what do you want to achieve this quarter? What are the 90-day rocks that are those smart 5% goals that I could achieve this quarter? So you're narrowing it down until you get to today where that sand is falling through the hourglass. And it's like, what am I doing today to get me closer to that? And as you're doing that, the sand is going down. And if you're moving toward your vision, you're actually filling the reservoir with reflections, with things that you can reflect on, those big wins, those points of reference that tell you of your ability to succeed. So you're actually filling up this sand of like, look at these great things I've achieved. I've become an Ironman triathlete. I got sober. I've spoken Chicago. I've done this, or I've started a podcast. Whatever it may be, those things are filling the reservoir, giving you evidence that vision that you're creating is possible for you. And so I think that's why I think the vision is very important, but it's necessary but not sufficient, because all of those goals that feed into the vision are equally important too.
Yeah, because you can have the dream, but if you don't really take some small practical steps, like it's just that
Mm-hmm.
it's a dream. And it
Yes.
just
Yeah.
sits out there. How many of us wander around thinking, oh, I'm just, like, oh, I want to be a millionaire. And, you're going out to eat 5 times a week.
Right. Right.
Or
You
you're
stay.
not
Yeah.
doing or you're not doing anything to advance yourself at work, or you're not, I mean, there's a million things you can do to be a millionaire, but they're just the two that came to the top of my mind. But the point is that there's a difference between just setting that dream and say, oh yeah, that'd be nice someday, versus, yeah, this is the compelling vision, compelling future that I see of myself. And I wonder if there's a difference, at least, and you can talk about yourself. Is there a difference between like having that, that crazy dream that's probably not going to come true, or, may or may not, versus the one that you feel in your heart? Like there's a feeling there that, this is hard. This is going to be hard to do. There's a little fear there, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you're going to get there.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying, and I think at least if I'm understanding correctly, what the way I look at that is, you sometimes you have these impulsive desires, like impulsive dreams, like I want a Lamborghini, or I want a house on the beach, and they're kind of like superficial, and I think of that as like, you're walking through the grocery store and you get to the checkout line and you have these impulsive like buys, like impulse buys that you have there, the tabloids or the Skittles or the candy bars, and that's kind of what that is, I think. They're not compelling enough to really grab onto your heart. And in order to grab onto your heart, to have that compelling vision, you really need to build the meaning behind it. So I think that a compelling vision, a compelling dream should have clarity. Like, you should be clear on what that looks like, not just I want a beach house. It's like, okay, no, but like, why? Like,
What
where is it? What
kind?
does it
Yeah.
look like? Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the meaning behind it. Like, what is that going to mean to your life? And it better mean something, and not just like, I just want to, like, live at the beach. Because if it doesn't mean something, hey, your brain will know, and it's going to call you out on it. It's going to say, no, that's not compelling enough for me. So that way, your heart and your brain need to work together. If your heart can call you to say like, hey, no, this compelling dream, I want to speak from stages, or I want to do this podcast because it's going to speak to, hundreds of thousands of millions of people who need to hear this message of getting over fear, or whatever it may be, or taking small steps to have massive wins in their lives. And I want to be able to see that person achieve those big wins later down the line after they've stacked all of these small steps, and just say, oh my gosh, it's amazing what a great life I've built because of what you've built. And that's meaning behind it. And when you have that, you build that third C, which is conviction. And so I talked about the C's. It's really clarity, conviction oh man, I'm blanking on the other C that I just talked about. But anyway, you get my drift. So
No, it's okay. While you were talking, I was writing down a question, but you already answered it. So I was going to ask you, like, when we have a big enough why,
mhm.
when our why is compelling, the how and the who will appear. When that why
Yes.
is big enough, I forget who said it, if it's a Ben Hardy, Dan Sullivan thing, but when your why is big enough, the who and how will take care of themselves.
Mhm.
And do you find, at least in your experience, because I know you also run businesses as well, do you find that if you have that why, but that you don't, if you don't have a compelling enough why behind it, you might start that thing, but then it's not going to, does it come to fruition or not? Do you find it fizzles out?
Yeah.
What's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had enough of those, and that kind of goes with the scientific experiment too. Is you do have to test your heart every once in a while and say, like, is this really, really compelling to me? And thank you for bringing that third C to me, by the way. Compelling was the third C.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, but I mean, so you have to test it, and if it does fizzle out, you have to kind of have the data behind it to say, well, why did it fizzle out? Like, was it because my heart really wasn't in it? Was it because I was in the fear? Was it because of this? And all of those moments should not be shaming moments. But I think one of the key elements of that, and this is a cliche that we often hear, and it's a cliche because it's true, is that in any journey towards something that's worthwhile or toward an achievement that we want, the achievement can't be the thing that ultimately drives us, because that achievement, once we achieve it, 15 seconds and we're done.
Yeah.
Like crossing the Ironman World Championship finish line for me, it was a dream I'd had for years. And my first reaction after I crossed that finish line was, oh my God, I can't believe I just achieved my dream. This is incredible. Now, where's the pizza? And that was like literally my next thought. So that moment of achievement, it's fleeting.
Yeah.
You're on to whatever's next. So you have to enjoy the journey. You have to be present in the journey and find that part of it fulfilling. And again, I think that's where the power of the name of your show is so important. And when I frame it, I talk about those 5%, stacking those 5% wins, is because in those wins, though, that's really where the fulfillment happens. The fulfillment happens in the personal growth. And you grow through failure if you learn from it. You grow through success if it moves you forward. So you can grow no matter what. You can game the system so that you're always winning. And that's a beautiful thing if you find that compelling why and that meaning behind what you're doing.
Yeah, I love what you said. It's not about actually getting the achievement, because it's like once you hit the target, it's like, then what?
Yeah.
And as you were talking, I was thinking of the analogy of running a race, but never getting to the finish line. You
Hmm.
just enjoy running the race for what it's worth, or climbing a mountain. I like mountains. So climb the mountain, you just don't make it to the top, and be okay with that. And when you achieve those little things along the way, as we talked about before, those evidences of success to continue to propel you forward to do your next best thing. I love
Yeah.
it. Just taking the journey along the way. Yes, I accomplished that thing. Take time to celebrate it. That's something I don't do. So when I achieve something, it's like, okay, when's the next thing coming? And I
Right.
don't know if that's high achievers or, people, I don't know where, I haven't quite figured out where the root on that is yet, but, you get to that, you finish that Ironman. It's like, okay, where's the pizza? But fortunately you didn't just stop there, that
Yeah.
you went and you searched for something else, whether it was another Ironman or blank, whatever it
Hmm.
was, but it's the journey along the way. And all too often we miss the journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
It's
just
all
miss.
about the growth. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Hmm.
miss the journey, and taking time to celebrate. I think that's been my theme lately. What are some other practices or things you do for yourself to help you enjoy the journey along the way?
Yeah. So I try to very strictly schedule myself, because I know my mind, and I think it's important to really know yourself. And I know that if I get caught in work mode, or just if I don't have things like specifically scheduled, I will like just start doing busy work. and doesn't get me anywhere. So I get frustrated and I fizzle out. So I think just getting like a very clear schedule. I use that that vision reflection reservoir funnel kind of thing for my purposes of planning, and I make sure that I get out every quarter to retreat and reflect on the previous quarter and plan my vision for the next quarter and what I'm going to do to get me closer to the vision. So that's kind of what keeps me on track and keeps me growing and keeps me like aligned with what I want to do. So all of that planning stuff and working and building in community is very important too. It's very important that, as you know, we surround ourselves with people that are doing the things that we want to do. And again, community should include mentorship, cohort meaning like people that are working toward the same thing at the same level, and trust, so that you can speak openly and vulnerably with the community.
Yeah. I like that you said about the time blocking and, being protective of your time. And as you said that, I had that, oh my God moment, because we've already been at this an hour. And then now I'm going to like, okay, does he have to go right now? Or are we good? I'm going to be mindful of your time.
Sure.
So, but this is a great conversation. Don't you find like some of the best podcast interviews are the ones that you lose complete track of time, and then you get, and it's like an hour and a half has gone by. It's like, I can't believe I just talked to you for an hour and a half. So I do want to be mindful of your time. Are you good for a couple more and we'll close it up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So talking about time, if you could go back in time to your younger self and deliver yourself a message, what would it be and why?
Oh, yeah. So I think what I would, knowing where I've been and not wanting to influence the outcome, because I've seen Back to the Future and I know what, speaking to yourself can do. I would simply say, just hold on to hope. Hold on to hope, and it will guide you through. You're capable of so much more than you know. So that's what I would tell myself.
I love it. So I ask everybody at the end same three questions. What's a book or resource that's had a significant impact on you?
A book that I will put out, The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler, and he kind of outlines very scientifically with a lot of data, the art of flow and how the highest achievers in the world, the top 1%, actually achieve flow and achieve really, really great things that are basically superhuman. And yeah, it's a really, really good read.
Oh my God, we didn't even get into flow.
Yeah.
I completely forgot to ask you about flow.
We kind of inherently talked about it. A lot of the principles. Yeah.
Yeah. What's one question or topic you wish I would have asked about and I didn't? And how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic?
Oh man. Yeah. It's hard to classify what I wish you would have asked. I guess if I did one topic we didn't expand on is family and how to kind of maintain this livelihood while living with family and the power of relationships and building those relationships.
It's another podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can just come off for that one. We'll unpack flow and then go into relationships. I think
definitely.
I think that's great. It's always good. As we close, what is one small step that someone can do today that's going to help them change their tomorrow?
Man, I would say that the best first step is to really visualize that long-term goal. And if your goal is to get over that fear that's getting in your way, that first step is probably the most scary. Stand up, face your fear, write them down, and then see how those fears are serving as are an obstacle in your life. That is a first and important step. Name that fear.
Name the fear. Got it. Set the goal. Name the fear. I love it. Adam, thank you so much for the gift of your time. I can't believe this has been an hour already.
I know, me too.
I know. Yeah, it was really good. But you're going to come back on.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right. How can people find you and your puns?
And if you want to see my puns, YouTube is probably the best place to find the all-encompassing stuff. I am youtube.com/@AdamChill. So Adam Chill, as we were talking about, @AdamChill. And there you could find my dad jokes and my podcast, Flow Over Fear, and anything else I'm doing. And you can also find me on Instagram @TheAdamChill, and all the other socials. I'm there too.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again for the gift of your time. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate it. This was great.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, reach out to me and let's have a conversation. Until next time, love yourself, then love others. Peace.